You ever seen a piece of paper that could ruin a life? Not a bill, not a court summons, just a plain sheet ripped at the edges, nailed to a post in the middle of a town so dry it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I saw one once. The town was Larkspur, a place forgotten by the rain and remembered only by the wind. I was just there for feet and nails. My name's Silas Boone. I had a small ranch a few miles out, a bad leg, and a quiet that had settled deep in my bones ever since my wife, Clara, passed on. 15 years of quiet. You get used to it, or you just break. I was tying up my mule when my eyes caught it. The notice. The letters were thick, angry-looking, smeared by a thumb dipped in ink. Widow auction, two words that had no business being next to each other. Underneath it said it was ordered by the court, lawful, final. And then there was a name written in fainter ink, almost like an afterthought. Martha Greer. A name I didn't know, but I felt it, like a stone dropped in a deep well. I just stared at that paper, flapping in the wind like a trapped bird. Behind me, I heard men talking. One of them chuckled, a low, greasy sound. Another one muttered something about it being a shame. But nobody was doing anything. They were just watching, waiting for the show. I turned away, my jaw set so tight I felt it in my teeth. I bought my supplies, didn't say a word to the clerk, and started the long walk home. The whole way, that name echoed in my head. Martha Greer. Why did it feel like a bell tolling, just for me? My ranch was quiet when I got there. Just the wind and the memories. The house stood crooked but strong, one chimney, one well, and one tree out back with a small stone at its base. Clara's grave. I took off my hat. 15 winters, I whispered to the stone, and still feels like yesterday. She'd been taken in childbirth, the baby with her. The world had been loud then, so much noise. But the silence that came after, that's what changed me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, a piece of wood in my hand, my whittling knife moving without thought. I tried to carve a bird, but the wings kept breaking. I kept seeing that notice. That name, Widow Auction, it was wrong. It was a sickness dressed up in legal words. And the whole town was just going to stand by and watch it happen. Come morning, the sky was a mean, pale gray. The cold had seeped into the bones of the earth. I knew I shouldn't go. It wasn't my business. I was a man who kept to himself, a man who let the world turn without him. But my boots thought otherwise. I saddled the mule, pulled on my long coat, and rode toward town. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any money to speak of. All I had was a feeling, a knot in my gut that told me if I did nothing, the quiet in my soul would finally swallow me whole. I was just one man, a broken one at that. What in God's name did I think I could do? The town square was a circus. Men were pushing for a better view, their faces a mix of excitement and shame. Women hid behind their parasols, whispering, their eyes sharp as needles. It felt like a county fair, but with a rotten smell underneath. In the center of it all was a makeshift platform, cobbled together from old crates. And on top of that platform stood a man in a tan suit with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The auctioneer. "Gather around, folks," he boomed, his voice slick as snake oil. A fine, lawful occasion, as ordered by Judge Ryland himself. He let that name hang in the air. Judge Ryland. The name carried weight, meant this wasn't some back alley deal. This was the law. "The estate of the late Milton Greer is to be dissolved," the auctioneer continued, "and his widow, Mrs. Martha Greer, having no kin to take her in, is to be given, by custom and by law, to the highest respectable bidder." Respectable. The word sounded like a curse, and then she stepped onto the platform. Martha Greer, she wore a plain gray dress, the kind meant to make a woman disappear. Her hair was pulled back tight, but the wind was already tugging strands loose, framing her face. And her face, it was a mask. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She just stood there, her eyes looking past the crowd, fixed on something none of us could see. I stopped breathing. It wasn't that she was beautiful. She wasn't. But there was a power in her stillness, a defiance in her silence. It was the look of a person who'd been screamed at by the world one too many times and had simply decided to stop listening. I knew that look. I saw it in the mirror every morning. "Let's start the bidding," the auctioneer chirped. A farmer offered 2 goats and a milk cow. A barber offered a room behind his shop and a portion of his weekly wages. Someone in the back laughed and yelled, "I'll give a bottle of whiskey for her." The crowd tittered. Martha didn't flinch. Not a single muscle moved. But I saw it. A tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth. A ghost of a tremor. She was breaking on the inside, holding the pieces together with sheer will. And in that moment, something inside of me snapped. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't planning. My feet just started moving. I pushed through the crowd, my boots kicking up dust. The whispers followed me. "Who's that?" "It's the widower, Boone." The auctioneer paused, annoyed. "Sir, do you have a bid?" The whole town square went quiet. Every eye was on me. I looked past the auctioneer, past the leering faces in the crowd. I looked right at her, right at Martha Greer. "I'll take her," I said. My voice was rusty from disuse, but it carried, flat and cold as a gravestone. The auctioneer's smile faltered. "Well, that's fine, sir, but you have to make a bid. What's your offer?" I kept my eyes on Martha. "She ain't livestock," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And I ain't bidding." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's face turned red. "Now see here, this is a lawful event. You can't just—" I didn't let him finish. I reached into the pocket of my coat. Not for a coin purse, not for a weapon. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. I held it up for everyone to see. The deed to my land, my home, the only thing I had left in this world, the 100 acres my father had worked, the soil that held Clara's bones. Everything. "She marries me," I announced, my voice ringing across the silent square. "She gets my name. She gets my house. She gets my land. It's all I got left to give." You could have heard a pin drop. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. The auctioneer just stood there, his mouth hanging open like a gate. And then Martha looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were pale, the color of a winter sky. But they weren't empty. They were searching my face, trying to read the story written there. She was looking for the trick, the angle, the lie. She didn't find one. And that's when I saw it. Faint, almost invisible on the delicate skin of her inner wrist. A small, scarred mark, like an old brand. My blood ran cold. It was the same mark my Clara had. A mark she never ever spoke of. A secret she carried to her grave. And seeing it on this stranger, this woman being sold on a wooden stage, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a sign. A ghost whispering from the past. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew in that instant that this was about more than just saving a woman from humiliation. This was about an answer I didn't even know I was looking for. After a long, stretching silence that felt like a lifetime, Martha Greer gave a single, slow nod. I turned back to the sputtering auctioneer. "I reckon that settles it," he stammered. But you need a preacher, a witness." I scanned the crowd and my eyes landed on old Matty Cobb, the town whittler, who'd been watching the whole thing with a stunned look on his face. "Matty," I called out, "you still carry that book of yours everywhere?" He blinked, then grunted, patting the worn Bible in his coat pocket. "Always." "Then you can be the witness." And just like that, under a sky the color of gunmetal, with the whole town of Larkspur watching in stunned silence, Martha Greer became Martha Boone. There were no vows exchanged, no rings, no kiss, just a signature on a piece of paper, a nod from a preacher who looked like he'd seen a ghost, and the sound of the wind catching the edge of her gray dress. She stepped down from the platform, her face as unreadable as ever, and for the first time, she stood beside me, a stranger who now owned half of my entire world. We walked away without a word, leaving the stunned crowd and the useless auctioneer behind. My mule trotted behind us, the only thing that seemed normal in a world that had just tilted on its axis. At the edge of town, where the dirt road stretched out toward my ranch, Martha finally stopped. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the horizon. "What do you expect of me?" she asked. Her voice was even, quiet, but not weak. I kept my eyes forward on the long road home. "Nothing," I said. "Nothing more than you wish to give." She nodded once, and together, two strangers bound by a piece of paper and a ghost from the past, we walked into the coming snow. The cabin was a fortress of quiet. The snow came down heavy that night, wrapping the world in a thick white blanket, muffling every sound. It felt like we were the only two people left on Earth. I pushed the door open and stepped aside, letting her enter first. She moved like a scout in enemy territory. Slow, cautious. Her eyes took in everything. The cold hearth, the single table with its two mismatched chairs, the bed in the corner with a wool blanket folded neat as a prayer. And the ghosts. The whole place was filled with them. "I ain't touched her side of the bed since Clara died," I said, my voice sounding loud in the stillness. "You can have it. I'll take the floor." Her gaze lingered on the faded quilt on the bed, hand-stitched. I could still see the faint initials in the corner. "CB," she didn't answer. "Or the loft," I added quickly, "if you'd rather." "I'm not delicate," she finally said. Her voice was a hush. She didn't take off her coat. Instead, she walked to the table, her gloved fingers brushing against the scarred wood. She seemed to be studying the silence itself, listening for its secrets. I busied myself with the fire, needing something to do with my hands. I struck flint to tinder, coaxing a small flame to life. As the light grew, it painted the room in dancing shadows, making the familiar space feel strange and new. It softened the hard lines of her face, catching in the loose strands of her hair. "I'll see to supper," I muttered, heading for the pantry. Beans and salt pork. It wasn't much, but it was food. As I chopped onions with a dull knife, I could feel her watching me. Her stillness was unnerving. It was like sitting in a room with a tightly coiled spring. "Water's from the well," I said, setting a tin cup on the table near her. "Pump's stiff, but it ain't frozen yet." "I'll fetch it," she said, standing up. Before I could protest, she was out the door, coat still on, stepping into the swirling snow. She returned a few minutes later, a dusting of white on her shoulders, the bucket full. She handed it to me without a word, and then, finally, she began to unpin her hair. It fell around her shoulders like a dark curtain. It was the first sign that the woman of iron might have flesh and blood underneath. We ate in a silence that was different from the one I was used to. My silence was born of grief. Hers was born of wariness. It was heavy, thick with unspoken questions. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. After we ate, she took our tin plates to the basin and scrubbed them clean. When she was done, she turned to face me, her back straight as a fence post. "I will not be a burden," she said, the words precise and measured. "I'll work. I can sew, bake, mend leather. I know how to shoot if need be. I don't faint, and I don't scream." I finally met her eyes. "You're not a burden." A flicker of something crossed her face. Surprise? Disbelief. It was gone before I could name it. True to my word, I laid a blanket for myself by the hearth. She took the bed, disappearing under the quilt that still smelled faintly of Clara. We lay there in the darkness, two strangers separated by a few feet of wooden floorboards in a universe of pain, neither of us sleeping. The first hint of dawn was breaking when I heard her stir. I opened my eyes and saw her standing by the small window, her silhouette framed by the pale gray light. She was wrapped in her arms, watching the snow fall. "You warm enough?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. She didn't answer my question. Instead, she turned from the window. "That mark on my wrist," she said, her voice steady. "You recognized it." It wasn't a question. I sat up slowly, the cold floorboards seeping through my clothes. "My wife, Clara. She had one just like it." Martha's eyes bored into me. "Did she ever tell you where she got it?" "No," I admitted. "It was the one part of her life she never spoke of, from before we met." Martha looked down at her own wrist, tracing the faint silvery lines of the scar with her finger. "It's not a brand from a rancher," she said softly. "It's the mark of a workhouse, the Glen Haven workhouse for orphans and indigents." A workhouse, a place I'd only heard whispers about, a place run with an iron fist, a place children were sent when they had nowhere else to go. a place owned and operated by one of the most powerful families in the territory. A family, Martha continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, called Greer. The name hit me like a physical blow. Greer. My mind raced. Her late husband was Milton Greer. The man who wanted her now was his cousin, Ephraim Greer. This wasn't just about a widow and her debts. This was tangled up in something older, darker. Clara was there? I asked, my throat tight. I don't know, Martha said, looking back at me. But if she had that mark, she walked through the same fire I did. Before I could process this, her eyes darted to the corner of the room, to the large cedar chest at the foot of the bed. It was locked. It had been locked since the day Clara died. What's in there, she asked. Clara's things, I said. Dresses, books. I never had the heart to open it. She took a step toward it, her gaze intense. Perhaps you should, she said. Perhaps her secrets are the key. A key to what? I didn't know, but a cold dread was beginning to creep up my spine. This quiet life I had built to protect myself from the past was about to be torn apart, and this woman, this stranger, was the one holding the hammer. The snow stopped, but the cold stayed. We fell into a strange routine, Martha and I. We worked side by side, moving around each other in the small cabin like two wary animals. The air between us was still thick with questions. But now there was something else, too. A shared enemy. A name. Greer. We didn't talk about it again. Not right away. It was a truth too heavy to be carried in conversation. Instead, we let the rhythm of work fill the silence. She fed the chickens. I chopped the wood. We mended a fence together, our gloved hands brushing once. A spark of warmth in the freezing air that we both pretended not to feel. But the cedar chest sat in the corner, a silent accusation, a locked box of secrets. I kept the key in a small tin box on the mantelpiece, and I could feel Martha's eyes on it whenever she thought I wasn't looking. She never asked again, but the question hung between us. One afternoon, I came in from the barn to find her running a hand over the lid of the chest. He was looking for something, she said, not turning around. Who? My husband, Milton, she said. He was always searching, ripping up floorboards, tearing apart walls. He was obsessed. He said his family had a claim to this whole valley, something lost, a document. My blood ran colder. My land, the land I had given her. Was it possible? He never found it, she continued. But his cousin, Ephraim, he believed the story. He believes whatever Milton was looking for is still here, hidden. And now I understood. The auction wasn't just about getting a woman to cook and clean for him. Ephraim Greer didn't just want Martha. He wanted a key. He thought she was the key to finding whatever it was he was looking for. And by marrying her, I had just put myself and my home right in the middle of his path. The peace I had known for 15 years was gone, replaced by a gnawing dread. Every time I looked toward the ridge, I expected to see a wagon. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. A few days later, my fears came true. A fine wagon, pulled by a team of black horses, rolled up our road. A man in a tailored coat sat at the reins, his face smug and polished. Ephraim Greer. Behind him, two deputies with rifles slung over their shoulders sat easy, like this was just another day's work. I stepped out onto the porch, my hand hovering near the doorframe where my shotgun rested. Martha appeared behind me, silent as a shadow, her hands clenched in the fabric of her apron. Mr. Boone, Ephraim called out, his voice smooth and friendly. It was the kind of friendly that made your skin crawl. He dismounted, dusting off his coat. A lovely rustic home you have here. My family used to own all this, you know. I didn't say a word. I just watched him. His eyes slid past me to Martha. His smile widened, but it was all teeth. Martha, my dear, I do believe that's my property you're standing behind. She's my wife, I said, my voice flat. Ephraim chuckled. Oh, that little stunt in the town square? Quaint, but ultimately meaningless. I had the auction declared invalid this morning, a legal technicality. Seems the notice wasn't posted for the required length of time. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel. As Milton's only remaining kin, the court has granted me legal guardianship over Martha and all of her Attachments. Until the estate is fully settled. He looked from her to me, and then at the house, a greedy light in his eyes. Attachments, he repeated slowly. That includes this land, which she was unlawfully granted. You see, Mr. Boone, you didn't save her. You just complicated the paperwork. One of the deputies shifted, his hand resting on his rifle. The message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. You're not taking her, I said. Ephraim's smile vanished. His face went hard and ugly. I am, and if you try to stop me, these gentlemen will be forced to enforce the judge's order. You're a squatter on Greer land, Boone, and you're harboring Greer property. Now step aside. He took a step toward the porch. Without thinking, I moved to block him, and that's when Martha did something I never expected. She stepped forward past me, her chin held high. I will go, she said, her voice clear and steady. I stared at her, stunned. Martha, no. She gave me the slightest shake of her head, her eyes sending a message I couldn't quite read. It's all right, Silas. The law is the law. Ephraim smirked, victorious. A wise decision, my dear. She walked down the steps, her back ramrod straight. As she passed me, her hand brushed against mine, so quickly I almost missed it. But I felt it, a small, hard object pressed into my palm. I closed my hand around it as she walked toward the wagon. Ephraim gestured for her to climb in, a gentleman playing a cruel part. She did so without looking back. We'll be back for the land, Boone, Ephraim called over his shoulder as he climbed into the driver's seat. Don't get too comfortable. I stood there frozen as the wagon turned and rumbled back down the road, taking the woman who was my wife, a woman I barely knew, away. The dust settled. The silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was sharp and angry. I looked down at my hand and uncurled my fingers. Lying in my palm was a small brass key, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, exactly which lock it would open. The cabin felt impossibly empty. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing embers, and the silence pressed in on me, heavier than ever before. For 15 years I had welcomed the quiet. Now it felt like a tomb. I stood there for a long time, the small brass key clutched in my hand. It was old, ornate, not the kind of key for a simple farmhouse lock. My gaze went straight to the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Clara's chest, the one Martha had been so drawn to. My hands trembled as I knelt before it. The key slid into the lock with a soft click, a sound that seemed to echo through the years. I took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid. The scent of dried lavender and old memories washed over me. On top lay Clara's dresses, neatly folded, her silverback brush, a stack of books, their pages yellowed with time. I had expected to feel a wave of grief, but all I felt was a sense of urgency. I wasn't digging through my wife's past. I was searching for a weapon. I carefully lifted the dresses out. Underneath them was a false bottom. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never known. Clara, my simple, quiet Clara, had secrets buried deeper than I could have ever imagined. I pried the thin plank of wood up, and there it was. Not a lost deed, not jewels. It was a ledger, a thick, leather-bound book, and tucked inside the front cover was a letter, the paper so thin it was almost translucent. The letter was addressed to me, to my Silas. It was Clara's handwriting. My dearest Silas, it began. If you are reading this, then the worst has happened. The Greers have found me. I have lived every day of our life together in fear of this moment. I was not an orphan, Silas. My parents were landowners, good people who stood up to the Greers when they tried to steal land in the next county. The Greers ruined them. They fabricated debts, forged documents, and had my father thrown in prison, where he died. They sent my mother away and put me, a girl of 10, in their workhouse. It was not a workhouse. It was a prison. That mark on my wrist is their signature. My vision blurred. I had to stop and wipe my eyes. Clara, in a workhouse, run by the Greers? I escaped when I was 16, the letter continued. I changed my name and ran until I found this place, this quiet corner of the world where I thought I would be safe, where I found you. But I knew they would never stop looking. not because of who I was, but because of what I took when I ran. This ledger, it was Milton Greer's father's book. It contains everything, every crime, every fraudulent land deal, every life they destroyed to build their empire. It is the proof of their evil. I took it so they could never use it to hurt anyone else. I have kept it hidden, praying you would never have to see it. Do not trust the law in Larkspur, Silas. Judge Ryland, the one they all respect, he is a Greer appointee. He is in their pocket. If you try to fight them here, you will lose. There is another way. A judge in Marysville, an honest man named Jacobs. He has a reputation for standing against corruption. It is a long ride, but it may be your only hope. Whatever happens, know that the years I had with you were the only peace I ever knew. You were my haven. Be strong. Be brave. Yours always, Clara. I let the letter fall from my shaking hands. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. My wife's quiet nature wasn't peace. It was fear. Her past wasn't forgotten. It was buried alive. And her death. The doctor had said it was a difficult birth, that she was just too weak. But now I wondered, had a Greer passed through town? Had she seen a face that brought the terror rushing back? Had they killed her without ever laying a hand on her? And Martha. Martha had walked through the same fire. She was part of this story, whether she knew it or not. Ephraim hadn't taken her to be his servant. He'd taken her because he was still hunting for this ledger. He must have suspected his cousin Milton hadn't found it, and he thought Martha was the last person who might know its whereabouts. He had taken her back to the Greer estate to break her, to torture the information out of her. A rage unlike anything I had ever felt surged through me. It was a cold, clean fire. The quiet, grieving man I had been for 15 years was burned away in that instant. I stood up, the ledger in my hand. It felt heavy, heavy with the sins of a wicked family and the hope of my dead wife. Judge Ryland was a dead end. The law in Larkspur was a sham. Clara had given me another path, Marysville, Judge Jacobs. It was a 2-day ride, hard and fast. I had no time to waste. I packed a satchel with the ledger, the letter, some dried beef, and all the ammunition I owned. I saddled my mule, but then paused. The mule was old, steady. I needed speed. I went to the small corral and threw a saddle on the wild-eyed mare I rarely rode, the one Clara had called Ghost. As I mounted, I took one last look at my home. It was no longer just a ranch. It was a battleground, and Martha was a prisoner of war. "I'm coming, Martha," I whispered into the wind. "I'm coming." And I rode. I rode like the devil himself was on my heels, the dust of Larkspur choking the air behind me, the truth of my past lighting the dark road ahead. The ride to Marysville was a blur of dust and desperation. I pushed the horse harder than I ever had, the rhythm of her hooves a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the plains. I didn't stop to rest, just to water the horse at the occasional creek, my eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The world had become a hostile place, filled with the ghosts of the Greer family's crimes. I thought about Martha, about her stillness on that auction block. It wasn't surrender. It was the calm of a soldier waiting for the right moment to fight. She had trusted me. She'd passed me that key, a silent plea, a transfer of hope, and I would not fail her. I arrived in Marysville at dusk on the second day, covered in grime, my muscles screaming in protest. The town was larger than Larkspur, with brick buildings and gas lamps that were just beginning to flicker to life. It felt like a different world, a world where justice might actually exist. I found the courthouse easily enough, a formidable stone building that looked like it had been carved from the bedrock of the earth itself. It was closed for the night. I found a livery to board the horse and a small boarding house where I paid for a room with one of the few coins I had left. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the heavy ledger in my lap, watching the strange town and waiting for morning. The next day I walked into the courthouse as soon as the doors opened. The air inside smelled of old paper and polish. I asked a clerk to see Judge Jacobs, and the man looked me up and down, a dusty, grim-faced rancher with wild eyes, and told me the judge didn't take appointments without notice. "It's a matter of life and death," I said, my voice low. I let my hand rest on the ledger, which was wrapped in an oilcloth. and it concerns the Greer family. The clerk's expression changed. The name clearly meant something here, too. He disappeared into a back room, and a few minutes later, he returned and beckoned me to follow. I was led into a large wood-paneled office. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Behind a massive oak desk sat a man who looked nothing like I expected. Judge Jacobs was not old and gray-haired. He was a man in his prime, with dark, piercing eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He looked less like a judge and more like a lawman who'd spent too much time on the trail. He didn't invite me to sit. He just stared at me. "You have 5 minutes," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Start talking." I placed the ledger on his desk. "My name is Silas Boone. A few days ago, in Larkspur, a woman named Martha Greer was put up for auction by order of your fellow Judge Ryland. I married her to get her off that block." Judge Jacobs' eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He gestured for me to continue. "Her late husband's cousin, a man named Ephraim Greer, came to my ranch yesterday with deputies. He had papers saying the auction was invalid and that he was her legal guardian. He took her, and he plans to take my land, which I deeded to her." "And you expect me to interfere with the ruling of another judge in another county?" Jacobs asked, his voice sharp. "I do," I said, "because Judge Ryland is in the Greer's pocket, and because this isn't about guardianship. It's about this." I pushed the ledger forward. "This belonged to my late wife, Clara. She stole it from the Greers years ago. It's a record of their crimes. Land fraud, extortion, everything. Ephraim Greer thinks Martha knows where it is. He's taken her to his family's estate to force the information out of her. She won't survive it." The judge was silent for a long moment. He reached out a hand and slowly, deliberately, pulled the ledger toward him. He opened it to the first page. His eyes scanned the neat spidery script, the columns of names and figures. He flipped a few pages, then a few more. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked up at me, his eyes blazing with an intensity that startled me. "Where is the Greer estate?" "About a half-day's ride north of Larkspur," I said. "An isolated place." He stood up, his presence seeming to fill the entire room. He was a big man, bigger than I'd realized. He walked to the door and opened it. "Sheriff!" he bellowed. A moment later, a tall, weathered man with a silver star on his chest appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff, I'm deputizing this man," Judge Jacobs said, pointing at me. "Then I want you to gather 6 of your best men, men who can ride hard and shoot straight. We're paying a visit to the Greer estate." The sheriff blinked, surprised. "On what grounds, Judge?" Judge Jacobs held up the ledger. "On the grounds of about 50 years of kidnapping, fraud, and murder," he said, his voice like cold steel. "And we are going to burn their empire to the ground." Hope, something I hadn't felt in 15 years, surged through my chest. It was sharp and painful and beautiful. Clara had been right. This was a man who didn't just follow the law. He hunted evil. We rode out of Marysville an hour later, a posse of 9 men with grim faces and loaded rifles. Judge Jacobs rode at the front with me, not in a judge's robe, but in trail clothes, a pistol strapped to his hip. He looked like an avenging angel. "This ledger," he said to me as we rode, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "It mentions a workhouse, Glen Haven." "Yes," I said. "My wife was there. So was Martha." The judge's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Many people were," he said, and there was a darkness in his tone that made me shiver. "The Greers built their fortune on the backs of children they bought and sold like cattle. I've been looking for hard proof of it for years. This book, this is the key that unlocks it all." We rode hard, the miles falling away beneath us. As we got closer to Larkspur, the landscape became familiar again, but it looked different now. I was seeing it through Clara's eyes, a place of hidden dangers and lurking fears. We bypassed Larkspur completely, cutting across the open range. I led them north, toward the sprawling lands that belonged to the Greers. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, we saw it. The estate wasn't just a large ranch house. It was a fortress. A high stone wall surrounded the main house and outbuildings. Men with rifles patrolled the top of the wall. This wasn't the home of a rancher. It was the den of a warlord. "They've built themselves a kingdom," the sheriff muttered beside me. Judge Jacobs reined in his horse, his eyes scanning the compound. And today the kingdom falls. He turned to the posse. We're not going in loud, he said. That gives them time to hide evidence. Or worse, get rid of our witness. There's an old service entrance on the west wall, used for supply wagons. It's their weak point. We go in quiet, we go in fast, and we find Martha Greer. This is not a negotiation. It's a rescue. My heart was a trip hammer in my chest. She was in there, somewhere behind those cold stone walls. We left the horses tethered in a ravine and moved toward the west wall on foot, using the fading light as cover. The air grew cold. The silence was absolute. It was the silence before a storm. We reached the service gate, a massive wooden door reinforced with iron. It was barred from the inside. Two of the deputies produced a heavy iron pry bar. With a muffled groan of stressed wood and a sharp snap of metal, the bar gave way. We slipped inside, guns drawn. The courtyard was empty. The main house was ahead of us, its windows glowing with lamplight. It looked peaceful, civilized. A lie. Judge Jacobs pointed toward a small, windowless stone building set off to the side, away from the main house. An old smokehouse, maybe, or a storage shed. There, he whispered. They'll have her somewhere she can't be heard. My blood turned to ice. We moved across the yard like ghosts, sticking to the shadows. As we approached the small building, I heard it. A sound that was almost not a sound. A muffled sob. It was her. Two of the deputies took up positions, watching the main house, their rifles ready. The rest of us converged on the stone building. The door was thick oak with a small grated window. The sheriff peered inside, then recoiled, his face pale with fury. She's in there, he growled. He's got her chained to the wall. The rage in my chest exploded. I lunged at the door, hammering on it with my fist. Martha! From inside, a voice, weak but clear. Silas? And then another voice, slick with anger. Ephraim Greer's. Boone? How did you... It doesn't matter. You're too late. Judge Jacob stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. Ephraim Greer! This is Judge Jacobs of the Marysville District Court. You are under arrest. Open this door now. A crazed laugh came from inside. You have no authority here, Jacobs. This is my land, and this is my property. Suddenly, the world erupted in chaos. A shot rang out from the main house, kicking up dirt near the sheriff's feet. The two deputies watching the house returned fire, the crack of their rifles echoing off the stone walls. The siege had begun. Get that door open, Jacobs roared. Now! The deputies slammed a heavy log against the oak door. It shuddered but held. Again, a crack appeared. A third time, and the door splintered, bursting inward. I was the first one through. The room was dark, lit only by a single lantern. It smelled of damp earth and fear. Martha was there, slumped against the far wall, a heavy chain locked around her wrist, the metal biting into the old scar. Her face was bruised, her dress torn. And standing over her, holding a pistol, was Ephraim Greer. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. I should have known, he spat, pointing the gun at me. She told you about the ledger, didn't she? It's over, Ephraim, I said, my own gun leveled at his chest. It's not over, he shrieked, his eyes wild. He grabbed Martha by the hair, pulling her up to use as a shield, pressing the muzzle of his pistol to her temple. This book has been the curse of my family for a generation. My father, my uncle, they all tore this valley apart looking for it. Milton died for it. I will not lose it now. Martha didn't scream. She looked right at me, her eyes fierce, defiant. Don't let him win, Silas, she whispered. Outside, the gunfight raged. It was chaos. But inside that small stone room, time seemed to slow down. It was just the four of us. Me, Ephraim, Martha, and the ghost of my wife, Clara, who had started this all so many years ago. Give me the ledger, Boone, Ephraim snarled, or she dies right here. Judge Jacob stepped into the room behind me, his own gun drawn. Let the woman go, Greer. There's no way out. Ephraim laughed, a high, unhinged sound. There's always a way out. He started to drag Martha toward a small trapdoor in the floor I hadn't noticed before. A tunnel, an escape route. He was going to take her down there and kill her. I had only a split second. A single impossible shot. He was using her as a shield, her head blocking most of his. But for a fraction of a second, as he pulled her, his own head was exposed. I didn't hesitate. The shot was deafening in the small space. Ephraim Greer's eyes went wide with surprise. The gun fell from his hand, clattering on the stone floor. He slumped to the ground, a dark hole in his temple. He was dead before he hit the dirt. For a moment there was only silence, broken by the ringing in my ears and the sound of Martha's ragged breathing. Then the sheriff was there, a key in his hand, unlocking the chain from her wrist. I rushed to her side, helping her to her feet. She leaned against me, her body trembling, but her eyes were clear. "You came," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I told you I would," I said, my voice thick. We stepped out of that dark room into the courtyard. The gunfire had stopped. Ephraim's men had surrendered. It was over. The deputies were leading them out, their hands bound. Judge Jacobs was standing over Ephraim's body, his face grim. He looked at the ledger, which one of his men had retrieved, then at me and Martha. "Clara Boone started a war when she took this book," he said quietly. "Tonight, you two just ended it." The Greer empire, built on pain and fear, had crumbled into dust. As the sun rose the next morning, casting a clean, new light over the valley, we rode away from the Greer estate, leaving it in the hands of the law. The place was being torn apart, searched for evidence, its dark secrets finally being dragged into the light. Martha rode beside me, on a horse provided by the sheriff. She was quiet, her bruised face turned toward the horizon. We didn't need words. We had walked through the fire and come out the other side. The silence between us now wasn't one of strangers. It was one of survivors. We arrived back at my small ranch in the afternoon. The place was just as I had left it. The chickens were clucking. The crooked house stood waiting. It looked peaceful. For the first time since I'd met Martha, it felt like home, not just a place to hide from the world. We walked into the cabin. Martha paused in the doorway, her eyes taking in the familiar room. It was different now. The ghosts were still here, but they weren't threatening anymore. They felt like family. Over the next few days, a new kind of quiet settled over us, a healing quiet. We worked the land, tended the animals, and slowly, gently, we began to talk. She told me about the workhouse, the cold, the hunger, the cruelty of the Greers. She told me she had known Clara there, though only briefly. They had been two scared little girls finding comfort in a shared whisper in the dark. Clara had been the brave one, the one who planned the escape. Martha had been too afraid. Clara had gotten out. Martha had been left behind, eventually sold into servitude, which led her to Milton. I told her about Clara, about the woman I knew, the woman who loved the smell of rain and the stubborn tulips that came up every spring, the woman who carried a universe of pain behind her gentle smile. We pieced their stories together, giving voice to the secrets they had both carried. One evening we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "That judge," Martha said softly, "Judge Jacobs, there was something about him." "What do you mean?" "His eyes," she said. "When he looked at the ledger, when he talked about the workhouse, it was personal for him." She paused. "When he looked at me, at the brand on my wrist, it was like he was looking in a mirror." A thought sparked in my mind, a wild, impossible idea. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. His intensity, his personal vendetta against the Greers, his words. Many people were there. A week later, a writer came from Marysville. He brought a letter. It was from Judge Jacobs. "Mr. and Mrs. Boone," it read. "The Greer organization has been dismantled, their assets seized. The ledger provided evidence for dozens of indictments across 3 counties. The men who worked for them are either in custody or on the run. The reign of the Greer family is over. There is one more thing you should know. When you came to my office, Mr. Boone, you set in motion the end of a story I have been living my entire life. I was born in the Glen Haven workhouse. My mother was an indentured servant who died there. The Greers sold me to a traveling merchant when I was 5. I carried their mark on my back for 20 years. I escaped. I changed my name. I clawed my way through law school with one single purpose: to gain enough power to destroy the system that created me. Clara's ledger was the final weapon I needed. The state has seized all Greer assets, including the land your ranch sits on. By rights, it is now property of the territory. However, in light of your actions and in recognition of the suffering both your families have endured at the hands of the Greers, I have used my judicial discretion. Enclosed, you will find a new deed. The land is yours, free and clear. No debts, no claims, no shadows. Justice has been a long time coming to this valley. May you both find peace in it. Sincerely, Judge Jacob Miller, formerly known as Isaac. I read the letter aloud to Martha. When I was finished, she had tears streaming down her face. But for the first time, they weren't tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of relief. The chains of the past had finally, truly been broken. For all of us. That night, something shifted between us. The space on the floor by the hearth felt farther away than ever. After we banked the fire, I stood for a moment, hesitating. "Silas," Martha said, her voice soft in the darkness, from the bed. I turned. "You don't have to sleep on the floor anymore," she said. I walked to the bed I had shared with Clara, the bed that had been a cold, empty island of grief for so long. I lay down on top of the quilt, on Clara's side, and for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel like I was betraying her memory. I felt like I was honoring it. Martha reached out in the dark and took my hand. Her fingers intertwined with mine. We didn't speak. We just lay there. Two souls who had been shipwrecked and had finally found a shore in each other. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The last of the snow melted, revealing rich, black soil. The tulips Clara had planted years ago pushed their way through the earth, their bright colors a stubborn defiance against the memory of winter. Martha and I had found a rhythm that was more than just work. It was a partnership. We planted a garden together, our hands in the same soil. We talked. We even laughed. The sound of her laughter in the small cabin was like a light being switched on in a dark room. The house was no longer a place of ghosts. It was a place of healing, a place of hope. One evening, I found myself standing by Clara's grave. The setting sun cast a warm glow on the simple stone marker. I didn't feel the sharp sting of grief anymore. I felt a quiet sense of peace, of gratitude. Martha came and stood beside me. "Thank you, Clara," she whispered to the stone, "for being brave enough to light the way." I knew then what I had to do. I went back inside the cabin and took the small tin box from the mantelpiece. Inside, beneath the key to the cedar chest, was a simple worn gold band, Clara's wedding ring. I had taken it off her finger myself, my hands shaking, and hadn't looked at it since. I walked back outside, my heart pounding. Martha was still by the grave, her back to me. "Martha," I said. She turned. The evening light caught in her hair. I saw not the scared woman on the auction block, but a strong, beautiful survivor who had helped me come back to life. I held out the ring. "I know this marriage started as a matter of necessity," I said, my voice thick. "A piece of paper to save you from a bad situation. But it's become more than that. You've brought life back to this house. You've brought life back to me." I took a shaky breath. "I'm not asking you to replace her," I said, nodding toward the grave. "I'm asking you to help me build something new on the foundation she left. I'm asking you to be my wife. For real this time." Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. A real, brilliant smile that transformed her face. "I already am your wife, Silas Boone," she whispered. "But yes, 1,000 times, yes." I slipped Clara's ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It wasn't an ending to one story or the beginning of another. It was a continuation, a promise that love, like stubborn tulips, can always find a way to bloom again, even after the longest, coldest winter. We built a life that was quiet, but it was a good quiet, full of shared work, easy laughter, and a deep, unspoken understanding. Our farm became a sanctuary, a place where the broken things of the world could come to heal. And in the heart of that sanctuary, two weary souls found not just justice, but a love that was stronger than any chain. You know, sometimes the greatest evil doesn't come at you with a sword, but with a piece of paper and a smile. It tells you that cruelty is the law and that your life isn't your own. But stories like this one, they remind us that one good person standing up when everyone else is sitting down can change the whole world. They remind us that no one is property and everyone deserves a chance to be free. If this story of two lost souls finding justice in the dust moved you, do us a favor and keep the fire going. Hit that like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you want to hear more stories about the moments that change everything, make sure you subscribe. We've got a lot more tales to tell.